It was a warm afternoon, and Marissa had just finished a long day at work. As a teacher, she had spent hours in the classroom, helping students with their lessons. She was looking forward to getting home, unwinding with a hot cup of tea, and maybe watching her favorite TV show. Her house was just a short drive away, located in a quiet suburban neighborhood governed by the Homeowners Association, HOA. Marissa had lived in the neighborhood for almost 3 years now. She loved the peace and quiet, the trees lining the streets, and the well-kept lawns. But lately, there had been some tension brewing in the community. The HOA had grown stricter with their rules, especially when it came to visitors. It wasn't uncommon for the security guards to stop people at the entrance, asking questions, checking IDs, or demanding that residents confirm their visitors' details. Marissa had always found this a bit annoying, but she usually didn't mind as long as they didn't cause any trouble. As Marissa turned onto the road leading to her neighborhood, she could see the security guard standing by the entrance gate, his uniform neatly pressed. His name was Carl, and she had seen him around before. He was a middle-aged man, with a stern look on his face, always doing his job with no room for mistakes. Marissa slowed down as she approached the gate, expecting to be waved through as usual. However, Carl raised his hand and signaled for her to stop. Marissa frowned. She had never been stopped before, and she couldn't understand why he was stopping her today. "Good evening, Marissa," Carl said, his voice firm and businesslike. "I'm going to need to see your ID before you can pass." Marissa was taken aback. "What? Carl, I live here." "You've seen me a million times," she replied, her voice a bit confused but still polite. Carl didn't respond to her familiar tone. He stood there, arms crossed, waiting for her to comply. "It's the rules. I can't let you through unless I see an ID." Marissa sighed. She wasn't in the mood to argue. She pulled out her purse and handed him her driver's license. A week had passed since the meeting with Karen, the HOA president. Marissa was cautiously hopeful, but she wasn't about to let her guard down. She had been through too much to believe that words alone could fix the damage done. She needed to see real changes, and she needed to see them fast. The community meeting was scheduled for that Saturday, and Marissa had decided to attend. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she knew one thing for certain: this was the moment that could determine whether things would improve or whether the HOA would simply revert to its old ways. As the day drew closer, Marissa found herself feeling a mix of anticipation and nerves. She had been quiet for too long, allowing injustices to slide by. But now, she had a chance to speak up, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever felt marginalized, unheard, or unseen in this community. The evening of the meeting arrived, and the HOA office was buzzing with activity. Marissa could feel the weight of the moment as she walked into the room, Lena by her side, offering her a quiet smile of encouragement. The room was filled with people, many of whom were neighbors she'd never met before. They were all gathered to discuss the recent incident and the changes the HOA would make. Karen Reynolds, the HOA president, stood at the front of the room, a microphone in hand. She seemed more nervous than usual, her posture a little stiff, as if she knew that everyone's eyes were on her. As the meeting began, she cleared her throat and began speaking in a calm, measured tone. "Thank you all for coming," Karen began. "We're here today to address an important issue that has affected not just one individual, but our entire community. As many of you are aware, an incident occurred recently involving one of our security guards, Carl. This incident was unacceptable, and we are taking steps to ensure something like this never happens again." The room was quiet as Karen spoke. Marissa could feel the eyes of the crowd on her, and she knew that many of them had heard about the incident by now. Some may have even seen it, but there was still a sense of discomfort in the air. People were eager to hear how the HOA would respond, but they were also waiting to see if Karen's words would lead to real change. "As you know," Karen continued, "Carl's behavior was inexcusable. No one should ever be treated the way Marissa was treated. We have taken immediate action, and Carl has been suspended pending an internal investigation. But we recognize that this isn't enough. This is about more than just one guard or one mistake. It's about creating a community where everyone feels respected and valued, regardless of who they are. Marissa sat up straighter, listening intently. This was the moment she had been waiting for. She couldn't just let Karen's words be empty promises. She needed to make sure that the HOA followed through on their commitments. Tonight, Karen went on, we're here to discuss the changes we're going to make to ensure that all of our residents feel welcome. We will be reviewing and revising our security protocols, especially when it comes to access to the neighborhood. We will also be implementing sensitivity training for all staff members, so that everyone who works here understands the importance of respect and fairness. Marissa could feel the room shift slightly as Karen spoke. The tension was still there, but there was a sense of hope in the air. People were listening, and they were beginning to realize that the HOA might be serious about making changes. We also plan to hold a series of community forums in the coming months, Karen continued. These forums will allow all residents to share their concerns, ask questions, and discuss how we can make our neighborhood a better place for everyone. We believe that open communication is key, and we want to hear from you. Marissa exchanged a glance with Lena, who gave her a small nod of approval. It was clear that Karen was trying to do the right thing, but the real test would be in the details. Could the HOA truly change? Or would this just be another round of empty promises? As the meeting went on, several other residents spoke up, sharing their thoughts and concerns. Some voiced their support for the changes, while others expressed skepticism, wondering whether the HOA's words would actually lead to action. Marissa listened carefully, nodding when she agreed and speaking up when she felt it was necessary. Finally, after a few more questions, Karen turned the floor over to Marissa. It was her turn to speak. She stood slowly, feeling the weight of the moment. This was her chance to make sure the HOA understood just how important these changes were, not just for her, but for the entire community. Thank you, Karen, Marissa began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. I appreciate the steps that have been taken so far, but we all know that actions speak louder than words. I'm not here just to talk about what happened to me. I'm here to talk about how we can create a place where everyone feels safe, respected, and valued. And that starts with holding each other accountable. The room fell silent as Marissa continued. It's not just about Carl or the security policies. It's about creating a culture where everyone, no matter their background, feels like they belong here. I want my neighbors to know that their voices matter, that their experiences are heard, and that they can come forward without fear of being dismissed or ignored. She paused for a moment, letting her words sink in. I want to thank everyone who has supported me during this time. But I also want to ask for more than just sympathy. I want us to work together, as a community, to make sure that no one else has to experience what I went through. We need to make real, lasting change. There was a pause in the room. Marissa could feel the eyes of the residents on her, some looking at her with admiration, others with uncertainty. But she didn't back down. She had said what needed to be said. Now it was time for the HOA to follow through. After a few moments of silence, Karen nodded. You're absolutely right, Marissa, she said, her voice sincere. We will do everything we can to make sure that your experience isn't in vain. We are committed to making our neighborhood a place where everyone feels safe and respected. And we will hold ourselves accountable to that promise. The meeting ended shortly after, but Marissa felt a sense of relief. It wasn't over, not by a long shot, but she knew that the first steps had been taken. The HOA had heard her, and they had promised change. Whether or not it would happen depended on everyone working together to ensure it. As Marissa and Lena left the meeting, walking out into the cool evening air, Marissa felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She knew there would be challenges ahead, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like she had a voice. And she wasn't going to let anyone take that away. "We did it," Lena said, her voice warm with pride. Marissa smiled. "We're just getting started," hoping he would just check it and let her go. But Carl didn't just glance at the ID. He stared at it for a few seconds, like he was searching for something wrong. The atmosphere felt tense as Marissa and the walk to the HOA office felt longer than usual. Marissa could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her shoulders. She wasn't just walking into an office to complain about a security guard's rude behavior, she was about to demand justice. Her heart was racing, but with each step, she felt a little more determined. Lena, walking beside her, was just as resolute. Marissa knew that without Lena's support, she would have been lost. She wasn't just her friend, Lena was the one who would stand by her when things got tough. The thought of facing this alone had terrified her, but now, with Lena by her side, she felt more capable of fighting back. When they reached the HOA office, they found it nearly empty. It was late in the afternoon, and most of the staff had gone home. The receptionist, a young woman named Sarah, looked up as they entered. Her eyes widened a little when she saw the seriousness on their faces. "Can I help you?" Sarah asked, her voice polite but a bit cautious. "We need to speak with the HOA president, immediately," Marissa said, her voice firm. "It's important." Sarah glanced at her computer screen, then back at them. "I'll see if she's available, but it might take a few minutes." Marissa nodded, but she wasn't about to wait quietly. Her nerves were frayed, and she wanted this resolved now, not later. Lena, sensing her impatience, gave her a reassuring look before sitting down. Marissa paced back and forth, her thoughts swirling. She knew what she wanted to say, but would the HOA take her seriously? Would they listen to her or brush her off like they had done with so many others? A few minutes later, the door to the back office opened, and a tall woman in a business suit stepped into the room. Her nameplate read Karen Reynolds, and she was the HOA president. Marissa took a deep breath, standing straighter as she stepped forward. Lena stood beside her, both women ready to make their case. "Miss Reynolds, thank you for meeting with us," Lena said, her voice calm but assertive. "We need to talk about something serious that happened earlier today." Karen Reynolds looked them over, her face unreadable. "Of course. Please, come into my office." The office was small but neat, filled with piles of paperwork and a few framed photos of the neighborhood's events. Marissa didn't sit down right away, she wanted to make sure her presence was known. This wasn't going to be a casual conversation. This was a matter of dignity and respect. Once they were seated, Karen leaned back in her chair. "Now, what seems to be the issue?" Marissa's heart was still racing, but she spoke clearly, making sure every word carried weight. "Earlier today, I tried to come home, but I was stopped by the security guard, Carl. He wouldn't let me in, even though I've been a resident here for years. When I tried to explain, he physically pushed me down." Karen's eyes flickered with surprise, but she didn't interrupt. Marissa continued, telling her everything that had happened, from Carl's refusal to let her through the gate, to the shove, to the way he treated her like a stranger in her own neighborhood. Lena chimed in, supporting Marissa's account and adding the context that many others had witnessed the incident. "Is this how the HOA conducts business?" Marissa finished, her voice trembling slightly with a mixture of anger and hurt. "Is this how you want people to feel when they live here?" There was a long silence. Karen leaned forward, her hands clasped together on the desk. "I'm sorry you had to go through this, Marissa," she said, her tone softer now. "That behavior is absolutely unacceptable." Marissa felt a glimmer of hope, but she wasn't ready to back down just yet. "I don't just want an apology. I want to make sure this doesn't happen again. I want to make sure Carl is held accountable for his actions." Karen nodded, her expression now serious. "I understand. And I agree. What happened was wrong, and I will make sure Carl faces consequences for his behavior. Marissa sat up straighter, her heart pounding a little less now. What kind of consequences? I don't want this to be swept under the rug. I want real change. Karen's eyes met Marissa's. I assure you, I take this seriously. I will personally speak with Carl, and I will make sure the security team receives proper training. We can't have this kind of behavior happening in our community. I will also review our visitor policy to make sure it's clear, fair, and respectful for everyone. Lena leaned forward, her voice sharp. And what about the community? What about the other residents who may have seen this or felt the same way? We need to be sure they know the HOA stands for everyone's safety and respect. Karen paused for a moment, then nodded. You're right. We need to address this issue with the entire community. I'll schedule a meeting to discuss what happened, and I'll let everyone know that this kind of behavior is not tolerated. We need to rebuild trust. Marissa's shoulders relaxed a little, though the anger still simmered beneath the surface. This was a step in the right direction, but it wasn't over yet. She knew that actions spoke louder than words, and she wasn't going to rest until she saw real change. I appreciate that, but I think we need more than just a meeting, Marissa said. We need a clear, actionable plan. I'm not leaving until I know exactly what steps you're going to take. Karen's expression softened, and for the first time, Marissa saw a glimpse of genuine understanding. You're absolutely right. I'll make sure we send out a formal apology to you, and I'll have the board vote on new measures to ensure something like this never happens again. Lena spoke up again. What about Carl? What happens to him? Karen sighed, her eyes dropping for a moment before meeting Marissa's. Carl has been suspended pending an internal investigation. I will personally handle this matter and make sure he faces the consequences of his actions. The weight that had been pressing on Marissa's chest lightened slightly. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but she was finally starting to see that her fight wasn't in vain. Karen seemed to be genuinely taking responsibility, and that was something. Marissa nodded slowly. Good. I'll be watching, Karen. We all will. This is about more than just one guard or one mistake. It's about making sure this community is a place where everyone feels welcome, where no one is treated differently because of who they are. Karen nodded back, her face serious. I understand. And I promise, we will make it right. As Marissa and Lena stood to leave, Karen walked them to the door. Thank you for bringing this to my attention. I will follow through on everything we discussed. Marissa smiled faintly. Thank you. But it's not over yet. I'll be holding you to your word. Lena stood by the gate. Carl, still standing a few feet away, seemed to shrink under the weight of his own apology. Marissa could feel the heat rising in her chest, the frustration mixing with a deep, growing sense of injustice. She wanted to say so much more, wanted to make Carl understand just how wrong he was, just how hurtful his actions had been. But somehow, the words didn't come right away. Instead, there was silence, the kind of silence that feels heavy and impossible to escape. Lena, who had just arrived, stood firmly by Marissa's side. She glanced over at Carl, sizing him up, and then turned her focus back to Marissa. Her presence was comforting, grounding. Lena had always been the type to speak her mind, never one to let something slide if she thought it was wrong. Don't apologize now, Carl, Lena said, her voice even but full of authority. It's a little too late for that. Carl flinched slightly at the sharpness of Lena's words, but he didn't say anything in response. Instead, he just shifted his weight awkwardly from one foot to the other, looking like a child caught in a mistake. Marissa could see that he wasn't used to being challenged like this, at least not by someone who wasn't backing down. He looked like he was ready to run, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the weight of the situation sinking in. Lena's right, Marissa said, her voice steady now, though still laced with emotion. She wasn't going to let him off easy. You can't just apologize and expect everything to be fine. You pushed me, Carl. You didn't just stop me at the gate. You made me feel like I wasn't welcome here, in my own home. Carl's face reddened as he ran a hand through his hair, looking conflicted. It was clear he hadn't expected this kind of confrontation, especially not from Marissa, someone who he had likely seen as just another resident to patrol. Now, his actions were in question, and for the first time, Carl seemed to realize the true impact of what he had done. But still, he didn't seem to understand fully. I didn't mean to hurt you, Marissa, Carl said again, his voice quieter this time. I was just doing my job. But I get it. It wasn't right. Marissa took a slow breath. The more Carl apologized, the more it felt like he was trying to make the situation go away. But apologies, she knew, weren't enough. Not yet. Not when something so deeply personal had been violated. Not when the hurt still lingered in the pit of her stomach, knotting tighter every time she thought about how she had been treated. You don't get it, Marissa said, her voice trembling with the weight of everything she was feeling. You're not sorry because you understand. You're sorry because you got caught. Because now, all of a sudden, it's not just me you've hurt, it's your job and the community that's at risk. Lena nodded in agreement, her arms crossed in front of her. She stood like a rock beside Marissa, unwavering. And the truth is, Carl, it's not just about you and Marissa. It's about how people like her get treated every single day. You may not see it, but it's there. And you just put the spotlight on it. Carl opened his mouth to speak, but then paused. Marissa could see him searching for the right words, but none seemed to come. For a brief moment, it felt like the world had gone quiet again, the weight of their words hanging heavily between them. Do you know what it's like, Carl? Marissa continued, her voice softer but still firm. Do you know what it's like to be questioned, to feel like you're not good enough, to be treated like you don't belong in the place where you live? I don't just live here, I belong here. And so do the other people of color in this community. We have as much right to be here as anyone else. Carl's eyes seemed to widen at her words. He opened his mouth to speak, but then closed it again, as if realizing that nothing he said could fix what had already been done. Marissa wasn't giving him a chance to make excuses anymore. She wasn't going to let him off the hook with a simple apology and some words about rules. Maybe it's time for you to think about that, she said, her voice steady. Maybe it's time for you to think about why you felt it was okay to treat me that way. You can't just hide behind the excuse of doing your job when the job is hurting people. Lena stepped forward then, placing a hand on Marissa's shoulder. We need to take this higher, Marissa, she said gently. This can't just slide. The HOA needs to know what happened, and Carl's actions need to be addressed. This isn't over. Marissa turned to Lena, her heart swelling with gratitude. Lena had always been the kind of friend who didn't just stand by. She took action, and that was exactly what Marissa needed right now. It wasn't just about standing up for herself, it was about making sure that no one else had to experience the same kind of humiliation. You're right, Marissa said, her voice now clear and determined. This isn't over. With that, Carl finally seemed to get the message. He stood there, silent and unsure of what to do next, as the gravity of the situation sank in. The apology, the fear, the guilt, it was all out in the open now. He couldn't undo what had already happened. But it was clear that Marissa wasn't going to let him get away with it. Look, I don't know what to say, Carl said, his voice uncertain. But I'll do whatever it takes to make it right. Marissa took a deep breath. She wasn't sure if Carl truly understood, but she knew that taking action was the only way to ensure something like this didn't happen again. She couldn't let herself fall into the trap of believing that apologies were enough. It was time to take the next step. Then show me that you're serious, she said. Take responsibility for what you did. And the HOA needs to know everything that happened. Carl nodded slowly, the weight of his actions starting to hit him harder. He turned, walking away without saying another word. Marissa watched him leave, but she didn't feel relief. Not yet. This wasn't over, and it wouldn't be until the HOA took real steps to address what had happened. Lena looked at Marissa, her eyes filled with unwavering support. Let's go make sure they know. We'll get this sorted out. Together, they turned toward the neighborhood offices, ready to make sure that Carl's actions would not go unaddressed. And for the first time that day, Marissa felt a glimmer of hope. This wasn't just her fight. This was for everyone who had ever felt unsafe, disrespected, or unheard in a place where they should have been able to find peace. Marissa stood there, still trembling, her mind racing. She watched as Carl walked away, his boots tapping against the pavement, as if nothing had just happened. She couldn't believe it. It felt like time had stopped when he pushed her to the ground, and now, everything was a blur. For a moment, she was frozen, unsure of what to do next. Her legs were shaky as she slowly made her way back to her car, her heart pounding in her chest. The pain from the fall was starting to set in, but it wasn't just the physical pain that bothered her. It was the way Carl had treated her, as if she didn't belong in the place she called home. She had always followed the rules, paid her dues to the HOA, and kept to herself. She never asked for special treatment. But this was something else entirely. As she sat in her car, the tears she had been holding back finally started to fall. She couldn't help it. Everything she had worked for, her career, her peace of mind, and her place in the community seemed to be slipping through her fingers. What had she done to deserve this? Why had Carl treated her this way? After a few moments, Marissa wiped her eyes and took a deep breath. She needed to gather herself. She wasn't going to let this man get away with what he had done. She had to do something. She grabbed her phone and dialed the number of her neighbor, Mrs. Peterson. Mrs. Peterson was an elderly woman who had lived in the neighborhood for decades. She always had a kind word to say and knew everyone in the area. Marissa figured if anyone had seen what happened, it would be Mrs. Peterson. The phone rang a few times before it picked up. Hello. Mrs. Peterson's voice sounded as warm as ever. Mrs. Peterson, it's Marissa. I need your help. Something happened, and I don't know what to do. Mrs. Peterson sounded concerned immediately. What's wrong, dear? What happened? Marissa took a deep breath before explaining. Carl, the security guard, he pushed me. He wouldn't let me into the neighborhood. He said I needed to show my ID, even though I live here. I tried to explain, but he shoved me to the ground. I'm okay, but I need someone to know what happened. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Marissa could hear Mrs. Peterson's breath catch. Oh my goodness, Marissa. That's awful. I'm so sorry you had to go through that. I didn't see the whole thing, but I did hear voices and some shouting. I didn't think it was anything serious, Marissa bit her lip, holding back more tears. It was serious, Mrs. Peterson. I feel like I don't belong here anymore. I've lived here for years, and now I don't know what to think. Mrs. Peterson's voice softened. I can't even imagine how you're feeling. I'm so sorry this happened to you. But don't worry, we're going to do something about this. I'll come over, and we'll figure it out. No one should be treated that way, especially not in our neighborhood. Marissa felt a small sense of relief. It wasn't much, but it was something. Thank you, Mrs. Peterson. I'll be here. After hanging up the phone, Marissa sat in her car for a few more moments, trying to collect her thoughts. Her phone buzzed again this time. It was a message from her best friend, Lena. She had seen the messages earlier and knew something had happened. Lena was the kind of friend who always checked in, and Marissa was grateful for her support. "Lena, are you okay? I saw the post on Facebook. What happened with Carl?" Marissa quickly typed back, "He stopped me at the gate, wouldn't let me in, and then shoved me. It's a long story. I'm okay, but I'm not sure how to move forward." A few seconds later, Lena responded, "What? This is crazy. I'll be there in 15 minutes. Just hang tight. We'll figure this out." Marissa felt a small sense of hope at Lena's message. She had always known that Lena had her back. The truth was, Marissa had never felt more alone than she did in that moment. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized she wasn't truly alone. Her neighbors cared about her. Mrs. Peterson cared. Lena cared. And she wasn't about to let Carl's actions go unchallenged. Just as she was about to gather herself and step out of the car, she heard footsteps approaching. She looked up, expecting to see Lena, but instead, it was Carl. He was walking back toward her, and Marissa's stomach twisted into a knot. Her first instinct was to get out of the car and confront him. But she hesitated. What was he doing here? Was he coming to apologize, or was he just going to make things worse? Carl stopped a few feet from her car and stood there, his hands at his sides. He seemed uncomfortable, almost like he didn't know what to say. For a moment, there was silence. Then, he spoke. I'm sorry for what happened earlier," he said, his voice low. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I was just doing my job. But I should have handled it better." Marissa stared at him, unsure of how to respond. This was the same man who had pushed her, who had treated her like she wasn't a part of the community, and now he was offering a half-hearted apology. She couldn't believe it. "Sorry." Marissa's voice trembled, but she didn't back down. "You pushed me, Carl. You didn't just ask for my ID. You shoved me to the ground. You embarrassed me in front of my neighbors. And now you're sorry." Carl shifted his weight from one foot to the other, clearly uncomfortable. I know it was wrong. I didn't mean for it to go that far. But the rules are strict, and I just the rules." Marissa interrupted, her voice growing louder. "This isn't about the rules, Carl. This is about respect. You treated me like I didn't belong here, like I wasn't a part of this community. I've lived here for years, and you have no right to treat me that way." Carl lowered his head, looking down at the ground. "I understand. I really do. And I'm sorry. I don't know what came over me." Marissa didn't want to hear his excuses. She wanted him to understand the weight of what he had done. She wanted him to know that this wasn't just about a misunderstanding, it was about power, about control, and about how people of color were often treated unfairly, even in places that were supposed to be safe. Before she could say anything else, she heard the sound of another car pulling up behind hers. It was Lena. She stepped out of her car with a determined look on her face and walked over to Marissa, standing beside her. "Is everything okay?" Lena asked, her voice calm but firm as she looked at Carl. Carl didn't respond. Instead, he looked at the ground, avoiding Lena's gaze. Marissa took a deep breath, her frustration still bubbling under the surface. "I'll be fine, Lena. But I'm not letting this go." "This doesn't look right," Carl said, holding the card up to the light. "I'm going to need to make a call." Marissa felt her frustration building. "What's going on here? I live in this neighborhood. I don't need to prove I'm a resident every time I come home." Carl didn't answer. Instead, he took out his radio and began speaking into it, asking someone to confirm her information. Marissa could feel her heartbeat quicken. She had never been treated like this before. A few minutes passed, and Carl didn't let up. Marissa sat in her car, growing more and more agitated. It wasn't just that she was being inconvenienced, it was the fact that this had never happened to her before. Why was Carl acting like she was some stranger? Was he trying to make a point? Marissa knew she wasn't the only one who had been frustrated by the HOA's increasing demands, but this felt different. It felt personal. Finally, Carl put the radio down and looked at her. "I'm sorry, but I need to verify something before you can come through," he said. His tone was cold, distant. He wasn't apologetic, just robotic. Marissa felt her anger rising. She had always been respectful, even when the HOA's rules felt excessive. But this was over the line. "I've been living here for 3 years, Carl. I don't need to prove anything. Just let me go home," she said, her voice trembling a little now, a mix of anger and disbelief. Carl's face hardened. "I'm sorry, but the rules are the rules. You're not getting through without verification." At that moment, something in Marissa snapped. She had worked hard all day, and now this man, a complete stranger, was treating her like she didn't belong in her own neighborhood. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tighter, her pulse racing. "Carl, I don't know what your problem is, but you're being unreasonable," she shouted. Carl didn't seem to care. Instead, he stepped toward her car, signaling for her to roll down the window. Marissa hesitated for a moment, but then, in a rush of frustration, she rolled it down. She was about to say something else when Carl suddenly reached for the door, opening it forcefully and stepping into her personal space. "Excuse me. What are you doing?" Marissa demanded, now feeling genuinely scared. This wasn't just a conversation anymore, Carl was crossing the line from authority into intimidation. Carl pushed her back roughly, trying to force her out of the car. "You're not getting in without complying," he barked. Marissa's heart was pounding in her chest. She couldn't believe this was happening. This man, who was supposed to be a security guard, had become an aggressor in the blink of an eye. She tried to push back, but Carl was too strong. He shoved her to the ground, and she stumbled, landing hard on the pavement. Pain shot through her body as she struggled to get up. She couldn't believe what was happening. The world seemed to slow down around her as she tried to gather her thoughts. She had never been treated like this in her own home. Her eyes welled up with tears, not from the physical pain, but from the shock. How could this be happening? Why was Carl treating her this way? For a moment, Marissa just sat there, dazed and stunned, her mind racing. She had been polite. She had followed the rules. She had never caused trouble before. But this was something else. Carl wasn't just treating her like a suspect, he was treating her like an enemy. As she tried to stand up, she saw a few neighbors peering out from their windows, watching the scene unfold. But no one was moving. No one was coming to help her. Marissa felt more alone than ever before. What was she supposed to do? Her hands were shaking as she finally got to her feet, and Carl stood there, watching her with a cold, expressionless look on his face. He had no apology, no remorse, just the same stern expression as before. For a moment, all Marissa could do was stare at him. Her voice was barely a whisper. "You've crossed the line, Carl," she said, her words filled with disbelief and pain. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, Carl turned his back and walked away, his job done, his purpose fulfilled. Marissa, still in shock, stood there in the middle of the street, unsure of what had just happened. The pain in her body was nothing compared to the hurt in her heart. This wasn't just about what Carl had done to her, this was about something much bigger.